I support us going out and doing the study that studies whether or not what is the nature of reparations and whether there should be cash payments, what should happen.
And to talk about the constructive approach to move forward in this whole reach to bring America together, to understand the hurts of other people, and to find a common ground when communities have been hurt by policies of this nation, and certainly those of us who are African Americans were not a whole person in this country, and certainly were not a whole person when this Constitution was written.
Congresswoman, when sort of thinking about this commission, I was kind of grappling with the questions that they would have to answer, because they're really big and difficult questions to answer. You know, what are the reparations for? Is it just for slavery, or is it for Jim Crow and the policies afterwards that have had a dramatic impact on the ability of African Americans to generate wealth? It has exacerbated this wealth gap, right? Who's going to pay for it? Who's responsible? How much is it going to cost, and how are you going to go about doing that? These are big questions. We talked about some research indicating that it could cost $14 trillion. Have you sort of contemplated how this country would go about paying, and whom would receive these reparations?
Marie, thank you so very much. Those are very thoughtful questions. The one point that I want to make is that America is not broke.
Part of the national conversation now, at least amongst black folks. People are talking about reparations, so for candidates not to have a plan or position on reparations is a problem.
The Democrats, with all of their newly elected House committee hearing power, continued to find more ridiculous ways to spend the taxpayers' money. The 42-year-old Federation for American Immigration Reform arrived at the number of $116 billion for the amount taxpayers shell out to fund the Democrats' open borders policy. Now the Democrats want to continue their narrative of polarization and white guilt by offering taxpayer dollars to 42 million African Americans for reparations of the descendants of slaves, which by some estimates could total roughly $105 billion a year, 15% of the U.S. national defense budget. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who has been a member of Congress since 1995 and a leader behind the reparations legislation, forgot what it took one good American to point out.
H.R. 40 is in fact the response of the United States of America long overdue. Slavery is the original sin. Slavery has never received an apology.
In 2008, the House of Representatives formally apologized for slavery and Jim Crow. In 2009, the Senate did the same.
And what if reparations fails? Does this embolden the lunatics on the left and their leading candidate Joe Biden's call for a physical revolution?
Let's start a real physical revolution if you're talking about it.
And by a physical revolution, he is alluding to a race war that the Democratic Party would ignite. What are the 9 million mixed-race Americans supposed to do? Stay home and fight themselves? What about the exemptions? I'm a direct descendant of abolitionists who settled in Flushing, New York in the 17th century, who assisted with the Underground Railroad. Is my family exempt? What about the descendants of the 360,000 Union soldiers that died fighting for the Emancipation Proclamation? Are they exempt? And what about all the white people who immigrated long after slavery and the Civil War ended? Are they exempt too? The real issue with reparations, well, they generally pay out to living survivors. In 1988, the United States paid $1.5 billion in reparations to the survivors of Japanese internment during World War II, while Germany has paid $89 billion to the victims of the Holocaust. Will those survivors be paying reparations to the ancestors of those promised 40 acres and a mule by Union General Sherman that was interrupted after impeached Democratic President Andrew Johnson reversed the Freedmen's Bureau process that had already awarded 40,000 freed slaves 400,000 acres of coastal land in South Carolina and Georgia? The federal government, under a Democratic executive office, turned around and took that land by force. Unfortunately, that was the perfect window for reparations because there were plenty of survivors, not 42 million people.
Let me just say to black Americans, not all, but most, we have given you reparations already. No more reparations. We don't have any more to give you. We gave you, integrated the schools for you. We integrated the neighborhoods for you. We allow you to even go into private cafes, even if we don't want you there. We allow that to happen. We allow you to get into schools and universities and jobs around the country, not because you qualify, but because of your color. Some of the best universities have allowed you in based on being black only, and they lower the standards so you can get through it. There's no more. Stop begging. And then men, black men, don't let the white man see you begging. Work hard, have something to offer. And people love to work with folks who have something to offer and not begging. And then to the black men, don't let the black woman know you're still begging. It's embarrassing. You must be beta men instead of Afro men.
My great-great-grandfather, Silas Burgess, came to America shackled in the belly of a slave ship. He was sold on an auction block in Charleston, South Carolina, to the Burgess plantation. Orphaned by age 8, he was fortunately surrounded by elder slaves who, though physically chained, mentally envisioned themselves as free men. They escaped, taking young Silas with them, making their way to West Texas. Silas worked hard and saved his money. Eventually, he became the owner of 102 acres of farmland, which he cultivated and paid off within 2 years. I proudly carry the name of my first American ancestor, who, like millions of others drawn or brought to our country, struggled past overwhelming obstacles to live the American dream. Silas founded the first black church, the first black elementary school in this town. He was a Republican, a Christian, and a pillar of his community. He was proud and industrious and taught his children to be the same. Now, because great-great-grandpa Silas was once a slave, so-called progressives want to give me money. Never mind that, like him, I'm an entrepreneur who received an excellent education, built businesses, raised a remarkable family, and unlike most white Americans, earned a Super Bowl ring. Because of work I've never done, stripes I've never had, under whip I've never known, these progressives want to give me money I've never earned. The fact that this money will be forcibly taken from others who also dreamed, worked, and sacrificed for it, I'm told is not my concern, but it is. At the core of the reparations movement is a distorted and demeaning view of blacks and whites. It grants superiority to the white race, treating them as an oppressive people too powerful for black Americans to overcome. It brands blacks as hapless victims, devoid of the ability which every other culture possesses to assimilate and to progress. The reparations movement conveniently forgets the 150 years of legal, social, and economic progress obtained by millions of American minorities. It also minimizes the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of white Americans and a Republican president who gave their lives to eradicate slavery. I think Grandpa Silas would have seen this loss of American lives as payment in full.
Something like 70% of the people that live in this country now, their families, their ancestors came here sometime after the Civil War. That's just a fact. Look it up. So 70% of people in this country, their ancestors came here after slavery. Of course, it's cockamamie. If your dad had slaves, you should know. I mean, it's just crazy. But this is 7 grandpas back. Then the South was something like 30 or 5%. Look it up. The Southern population was a lot smaller than the Northern population. Something like a third, if memory serves, in the Civil War. They had about 1/10 of the factories. So that's a third of the population. So you got a third of the population was here before the end of the Civil War in the South. You've got 70% that comes after. So it's a tiny portion already. And then 2% of the South has slaves. So it is a tiny group of people that have any ancestors associated with it. And then Beto says all white people owe money to black people. And they're not going to give black people money. they're going to just take money in some new race cult and put it into some program to brainwash blacks and turn them into SJWs. You know that. But what did the Nazis and the Soviets do? If you resisted the Soviets, especially under Stalin and Lenin before that, if somebody in your little town of 200 people resisted and, say, killed a commissar, they would arrest the town leadership and take them to Siberia for 20 years. Or they might execute some people. And the Nazis, if one German soldier got killed in a town by one of the citizens, they would normally kill about 10 people. If an SS officer got killed, sometimes they would kill thousands in retribution. That is authoritarianism. Now, let's see my math's right. They looked it up. 21 million lived in the northern states and 9 million in the south. The 3.5 million were slaves. So that means about 6 million, 5 point something million. So I was right. It's about a third. So there you go. My memory served. But let me just get back to this. Just showing folks, I don't just make this stuff up. I mean, I'm doing this right here. This isn't some rigged pre-deal where I say, check this. I just go off the fly from my memory and see if my memory still works. It's like a memory game. The point is that almost no one alive in this country has almost anybody that owns slaves. And 7 generations back, what planet are you on where you say that my neighbor, a guy down the street shoots a cop in Nazi Germany, I get sent to a concentration camp? That's in America and under jurisprudence and under English common law, you're guilty for what you do, not what somebody else does. That's like saying if a black man's grandfather robbed a bank and shot the teller in 1952, that grandson of that guy has to pay reparations to the woman's grandkids that got shot. That's just crazy. But Beto O'Rourke, he's on TV in between saying the world's going to end in 12 years like AOC, saying we need to pay reparations to black people. That's how desperate the Democratic Party is. Just unbelievable. So let's go ahead and roll this clip. Here it is.
Your fellow Texan, Sheila Jackson Lee, has proposed a commission to study reparations. If that passes and you are president of the United States, would you sign that bill?
Yes. I had a chance to speak with and just listen to and learn from Brian Stevenson in Montgomery, Alabama, and learn from his work on working with the community to build a memorial to justice and to peace.
Can you imagine the legalese of saying the genetic testing, trying to find who had a background and then who pays what? I mean, that is crazy. And again, if your daddy killed somebody, you're to blame now. Because once you start saying sins of the forefathers and you've got to pay for them, this is the most destructive crap I've ever heard of. Let's go back to it.
He said, foundational to reparations is the word repair. Foundational to repair is the truth. And until all Americans understand that civil rights are not just those victories that I began with at the outset.
Weird jive talk, weird code, weird NLP about situational repair, truth, jibber jubber. Because it's just a giant con game. He's telling you your newborn baby owes somebody money when you weren't even on this damn continent when your great-great-granddaddy came here. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard of, but welcome to America, man. Welcome to the left.
Dallas, Tarrant County, Denton, Collin, anybody from the Rio Grande Valley, far west Texas and El Paso, Lubbock, Amarillo, and the Panhandle, Longview, Texarkana, and East Texas. On behalf of every one of the 254 counties of this great state, we welcome Dr. Jill Biden and Vice President Joe Biden, el próximo presidente de los Estados Unidos, aquí con nosotros este momento.
Scott Moorfield for the Daily Caller reports that the former ACLU Executive Committee member Michael Myers criticized the slavery reparations movement as sheer racial rhetoric and buffoonery. He said it on the Ingram Angle. Myers also slammed the civil rights leader Al Sharpton, who last week made it a point to directly ask Democrat presidential candidates who appeared at his National Action Network conference whether or not they would support a bill to study the issue. Take a look.
Would you sign the bill for reparations?
Yes, I would. I already support that bill. When I'm elected president, I will sign it.
Absolutely, I would sign that into law.
The House and Senate passed that bill, of course I would sign it.
I firmly support Congresswoman Jackson Lee's bill to create a commission to study reparations.
There are things that we need to do in this country that have been a long time in coming. One of those is to move forward with reparations.
Here now is Michael Myers, former ACLU National Board member. Now, Michael, you say that this is all a scam. Explain.
Of course it is. It's more that blame whitey movement, mania, madness, and it is sheer racial rhetoric. And that's what you get at the Al Sharpton so-called House of Justice. You have buffoonery, and you have diversion, you have distraction, you have this notion of farce. So at that House of so-called Justice, you have either a horror picture show showing, or you have a farce. Either way, it is not to be taken seriously. I can't understand how serious presidential contenders can give legitimacy to a racial blowhard. And I think it is outrageous and silly and idiocy on the part of the presidential candidates. And anybody who thinks that white Americans are going to take the blame or going to feel guilty or give their land and their property away in some sort of reparations pot because they feel responsibility for the sins of their forebears. They're not.
Yeah, absolutely insane. And I'm glad this guy's talking some serious sense into the situation. You got all these candidates going on and pontificating, Al Sharpton putting them all on the spot at his little action network, to putting him on the spot saying, do you support reparations? Which is like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Wait, what year is it now? 2019. How could we even be talking about this stuff? I mean, I could possibly see the discussion happening in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. I could see it happening then, but now? Why are we having this conversation? It's only because they need to continue to perpetuate division. They need to perpetuate division. The left needs to do this so that they can control and manipulate the people for votes and power. That's bottom line. I mean, how many people are like, yay, reparations, pay me. Give me a big fat check, I'll prove it to you. You know, oh yeah, and everyone jumping on the bandwagon for that. It'll never happen. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. It's buffoonery, like he said. But they throw it out there as red meat to like bribe people for votes. The former ACLU executive and current New York Civil Rights Coalition executive director then had a few words for the goings-on at Sharpton's conference, and then they later discussed how such a policy would be implemented, where the money would come from, and how it would eventually go to the hustlers instead of those who actually need it. And that's usually the case here. Just like when we give money to third world nations. Where does the money go? It goes to the dictators at the top. Am I right?
We have to challenge these forces of hate and stand up and simply say what the vast majority of Americans agree to. This is not our America. No, for real, not applaud. This is not who we are. This is not the image we wish to spread around the world, which is happening. This is not who we are, because it's not who we are.
We're going to have to put off spending on things we don't need.
The politician always saying something stupid, it's Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Joe Biden.
Hillary Clinton is as qualified or more qualified than I am to be Vice President of the United States of America. And quite frankly, it might have been a better pick than me.
What difference at this point does it make